Black Gold and Broken Dreams. The story of coal miners and the British in Enugu State, Nigeria, in 1950s. Imagine a place so rich in natural resources that it seemed destined for greatness. A place where the earth beneath held enough wealth to transform an entire region. But instead of prosperity, it brought suffering, exploitation, and ultimately, decline. This is the story of Enugu State, Nigeria, and the black gold that was supposed to change everything. I'm telling you this story today because it's not just history. It's a lesson about how wealth can destroy, how resources can enslave, and how an entire people can be trapped in a cycle of exploitation they didn't create and couldn't escape. Welcome back to the channel. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell because stories like this deserve to be heard and remembered. Before we talk about coal, we need to talk about what was here before. The lands that would become Enugu State were home to the Igbo people, one of Africa's most remarkable civilizations. Every village had a council of elders. Every major decision was made by consensus. Every man had a voice. This wasn't a system designed for conquest or domination. It was designed for community, for equality, for everyone to have their say. The land was incredibly fertile. Yams grew abundantly, so much so that the yam harvest was celebrated with massive festivals where entire communities gathered to eat, drink, and give thanks. Women controlled trade. They weren't sitting at home waiting for men to provide. They were in the markets, negotiating prices, building wealth, running commerce. A woman could become rich. A woman could become powerful. A woman could own land. Men who were ambitious could accumulate wealth, take titles, and gain respect through their own efforts. The Igbo system rewarded hard work. It rewarded intelligence. It rewarded ambition. This is why the Igbo became known as traders, merchants, and innovators. This is why they built networks across West Africa. This is why they prospered. And then, everything changed. By the late 1800s, Britain was colonizing Africa. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't consensual. It was violent, deliberate, and complete. The British didn't respect Igbo democracy. In fact, they found it frustrating. How do you control people who are used to questioning authority? How do you govern people who expect to have a say in decisions? How do you extract resources from people who believe in equality? The answer, according to the British, was to destroy these democratic structures and replace them with something easier to control. They appointed warrant chiefs, men they could control, who reported to British district officers. These weren't traditional leaders. Traditional leaders had to respect the people. Warrant chiefs had to respect only the British. This created a new kind of hierarchy, a new kind of authority that had no roots in Igbo culture, no legitimacy among Igbo people, but all the power of the colonial state behind it. Taxes were imposed. Young men were forced into labor. Traditional practices were banned. Igbo autonomy, that thing the Igbo had fought for and valued for centuries, was simply erased. But the British weren't content with just political control. They were looking for something else. They were looking for wealth. And in 1909, they found it. In 1909, geologists discovered coal, massive quantities of coal, some of the highest quality coal in the world, buried beneath the Enugu Plateau. To the British, this was jackpot. To the British, this meant money, wealth, power, influence. By 1915, mining operations had begun. The Nigerian Coal Corporation was established. And almost overnight, Enugu transformed from a rural collection of villages into a bustling industrial town. Railways were built. The Enugu to Port Harcourt Railway, completed in 1916, connected the coal mines directly to the ocean. Coal could now be extracted from the earth and shipped to Britain within weeks. Electricity plants were constructed. Administrative buildings rose up. Housing was built for workers and colonial officials. Shops and markets sprang up to serve this new population. What had taken centuries to build in traditional Igbo society, a functioning, sustainable economy based on agriculture and trade, was about to be destroyed in just a few decades by a single commodity. The promise was intoxicating. Coal would bring development. Coal would bring jobs. Coal would bring prosperity. Coal would transform Enugu into a modern city. What they didn't tell the Igbo people was the price that would be paid. Thousands of men entered those mines. Some went voluntarily, drawn by wages that seemed good when you had no other options. Many others were forced, conscripted by colonial administrators who met quotas by simply taking men from villages. Imagine descending into complete darkness, hundreds of meters beneath the earth, with minimal equipment, knowing that cave-ins, explosions, and suffocation were real possibilities. Imagine doing this not for weeks or months, but for years, for decades, for your entire adult life. The mines of Enugu in the early 20th century were death traps. Ventilation was inadequate. Wooden supports would rot and collapse. Water would seep in, creating hazards. Equipment was basic, dangerous, and often broken. Medical care barely existed. If you were injured underground, you were carried out and left to whatever happened next. The mortality rate was staggering. Men died regularly. Sometimes it was dramatic, explosions or cave-ins that killed dozens at once. More often it was slow. Coal dust filled the lungs. After a few years, a miner couldn't breathe properly. After 10 years, he was coughing blood. After 20 years, he was dead. A miner in his 30s looked like an old man. His hands were black, permanently stained by coal despite scrubbing. His lungs were scarred. His cough never stopped. TB was rampant. Silicosis, the disease caused by breathing coal dust, was essentially universal among long-term miners. And the wages? They were pathetic. I need you to understand something. This wasn't employment in any fair sense. This was exploitation dressed up as wages. A miner might earn 2 shillings a day in the 1920s and 30s. Sounds like something? Let me put this in perspective. A loaf of bread cost a shilling. 2 shillings a day meant you could barely feed your family, let alone pay for housing or medicine or education. But here's where it gets worse: the company store system. The mines operated Tommy shops, stores where workers had to buy necessities. Prices in the company store were double or triple what they cost in regular markets. So a worker couldn't just take his pitiful wage and buy cheaply elsewhere. He was forced to buy from the company at inflated prices. And if you didn't have enough cash, the company extended credit. They literally kept accounts of what you owed. Deductions were made from your wages, but the interest was enormous. The math never worked. A miner could work an entire year and end up owing the company money. You were trapped, completely trapped. This is what the system was designed to do. It wasn't an accident. It was intentional. Keep workers desperate, indebted, and powerless. Make them dependent on the company for everything: employment, housing, food, credit. This is slavery. Not the slavery of chains, though beatings and forced labor happened too, but the slavery of absolute economic dependency. You couldn't leave because you were in debt. You couldn't negotiate because there were always other desperate men waiting to take your place. You couldn't complain because the company could blacklist you and no other employer would hire you. This system lasted for decades. Generations of miners lived and died in this trap. But miners weren't alone in their suffering. Their families suffered too. Housing for miners was provided by the company, and I use the word housing loosely. Miners typically lived in compounds, crowded, unsanitary buildings with minimal space. A family of 6 or 8 might occupy a single room. No running water, no proper toilet facilities, no ventilation. Disease was constant. Respiratory infections, dysentery, malaria, tuberculosis. Mothers watched their children develop coughs that never went away, coughs that meant the child, like the father, would eventually die from lung disease. Infant mortality in mining families was catastrophically high. Women had impossible choices. If your husband was a miner, you lived in poverty. If you wanted to improve your family's circumstances, you had to find work yourself, usually in markets, brewing beer, taking in laundry, whatever you could do. You were working a second job while your husband was working in the mines, and your children were growing up in poverty anyway. Children didn't go to school. There was no money for school fees. Even if there had been, children were needed to help with household work or watch younger siblings while mothers worked. This is what the development of Enugu looked like for most of its people. Cities were built. Infrastructure was developed. Wealth was created, but it didn't flow to the miners or their families. It flowed to the company owners, the colonial administrators, the British government. Meanwhile, the people who made it possible lived in misery. For 30 years, the miners endured. But human patience has limits. And by the 1940s, those limits were being reached. A new consciousness was emerging. Workers began talking to each other. In the evenings after work, sitting outside their miserable compounds, they discussed what was being done to them. Labor leaders emerged, brave men and women who risked everything to organize their fellow workers. In 1949, it came to a head. The The miners of Enugu launched a general strike. They walked out. They demanded wage increases. They demanded better conditions. They demanded to be treated like human beings. The strike paralyzed coal production. No coal was leaving Enugu. The British colonial administration couldn't allow this. They couldn't allow workers to think they had power. On November 18, 1949, colonial police confronted striking miners. What happened next was tragic. Police opened fire on the workers. They shot men who were simply asking to be paid fairly. They killed dozens. The official number was 21, but the real number was likely higher. The Enugu shooting, as it came to be known, became a symbol of colonial brutality, a symbol of the suffering workers would endure rather than submit to exploitation, a symbol that would echo through Nigerian history. This moment radicalized Nigeria. Enugu became central to the nationalist movement for independence. Workers who had been focused on their immediate conditions suddenly understood they were part of a larger struggle, a struggle for their country's freedom from colonial control. The miners of Enugu didn't get their better wages. They didn't get safe working conditions, but they helped transform Nigeria. Their sacrifice mattered. While the social costs of mining were measured in human suffering, the environmental costs were measured in permanent damage to the land itself. After decades of mining, the earth beneath Enugu was riddled with tunnels and shafts. The ground was unstable, prone to sudden collapses and subsidence. Above ground, massive excavations created enormous pits. Waste from mining operations accumulated in toxic dumps. Vegetation disappeared. Trees that had stood for centuries were cut down for mining operations and fuel. The soil, once incredibly fertile, became contaminated with coal dust and mining debris. It turned black. Nothing grew in it. Water sources were poisoned. Streams that communities had used for generations became toxic. Underground water reserves were contaminated. Wells that families depended on became unsafe to drink from. The Igbo had lived in harmony with this land for centuries. They understood how to use it sustainably. They took what they needed and the land regenerated. But coal mining wasn't sustainable. It was extraction, pure extraction, taking everything and leaving devastation. Farmland that families had worked for generations became unusable. The agricultural base of Enugu collapsed. People who had been farmers were forced into wage labor because farming was no longer possible. Another form of dependency, another trap. The irony is brutal. The coal that was supposed to bring prosperity destroyed the very foundation of survival, the fertile earth. Nigeria became independent in 1960. There was hope. Maybe now, with control of their own resources, the Igbo people would benefit from the coal. Maybe now wealth would be distributed fairly. Maybe now the suffering would end. It didn't work out that way. First came the Biafran War, a civil war from 1967 to 1970 that devastated the Igbo region. Enugu was in the heart of the conflict. Mining infrastructure was destroyed. The economy was shattered. Hundreds of thousands died. But beyond the immediate tragedy of war, something else was happening. The world was changing. Oil had been discovered in Nigeria. Massive quantities of oil. Oil was becoming more valuable than coal. It was easier to extract. It was what the modern world wanted. Coal became less important. Investment in coal mining dried up. One by one, mines closed. Employment collapsed. By the 1980s, what had been one of Nigeria's most important industries was essentially dead. Enugu, which had been transformed by coal, was now being destroyed by coal's obsolescence. An entire economy, built on a single commodity, crumbled when that commodity lost value. And no one had planned for this. No government had said, when coal declines, we'll develop agriculture or light manufacturing or tourism. There was no plan. There was just dependency on coal, and when coal was gone, there was nothing. Poverty returned to Enugu. Not the poverty of poor agricultural communities. There are systems in place for that. This was the poverty of economic collapse. This was the poverty of unemployment. This was the poverty of a region that had bet everything on a single commodity and lost. What does the story of Enugu tell us? What's the lesson here? The first lesson is about resources. Having resources doesn't automatically bring development. It doesn't automatically bring wealth. Without proper governance, without planning for sustainability, without ensuring benefits are shared fairly, resources can actually trap you. They can make you dependent. They can make you vulnerable. The second lesson is about exploitation. When a resource is controlled by outsiders, Whether they're colonial corporations or foreign companies, the wealth flows outward. The people doing the hardest, most dangerous work get the least. This isn't an accident. It's how the system is designed. The third lesson is about diversity. An economy dependent on a single commodity is fragile. When that commodity loses value, everything collapses. Enugu needed to develop multiple sources of income: agriculture, manufacturing, services, education, tourism. Multiple sources means stability. Single commodity dependence means disaster. The fourth lesson is about the human cost. We often talk about development, progress, GDP, and economic growth in abstract terms. We forget that behind those numbers are people. Real people. The miners of Enugu were real people. They had dreams. They had families. They suffered. Many died, and their suffering wasn't acknowledged. Their sacrifice wasn't honored. They were seen as expendable. The Igbo people had created one of the world's most functional egalitarian societies. Coal mining destroyed that. It replaced democracy with wage labor hierarchies. It replaced community with dependency. It replaced sustainable agriculture with environmental devastation. And at the end, when coal was no longer profitable, it left behind poverty, environmental damage, and broken communities. Is this the price of development? Is this the cost of progress? I don't think it has to be. Today, Enugu State is trying to diversify. The government is attempting to develop new industries. Tourism is being promoted. Agriculture is being revived. But the scars remain. The poisoned earth remains. The abandoned mines remain. The unemployment remains. The story of Enugu is a story of resilience too. Despite everything done to them, the Igbo people survived. They maintained their culture. They continued to fight for independence and justice. They contributed immensely to modern Nigeria. But they deserved better. They deserved a path where natural resources created genuine prosperity, where workers were treated fairly, where the environment was protected, where communities thrived. That's what this story is really about. It's about demanding that resources be managed better. It's about insisting that workers be treated with dignity. It's about recognizing that short-term extraction always destroys long-term sustainability. If you're watching this from Nigeria, from Africa, or from anywhere in the world, remember Enugu. Remember that black gold that was supposed to change everything. Remember that it didn't, not in the way the colonizers promised. Remember the miners. Remember their struggle. And use that memory to demand better. Demand that your resources benefit your people. Demand that your workers are protected. Demand that your environment is preserved. Demand that development is truly sustainable. Demand that wealth is shared fairly. That's how we avoid creating another Enugu. Thank you for watching. If you found this story meaningful, please share it. Please like it. Please subscribe so you see more stories about history, about justice, and about the real human costs behind the events we read about in textbooks. This has been the story of Enugu State, the story of black gold and broken dreams. I'll see you in the next video.